On the edge of East Valley Ridge, Tennessee, nestled behind a curtain of oak trees and the soft hum of cicadas, stood a house that didn't answer to anyone. No board meetings. No bylaws. No HOA. Just a modest two-story home with a pool out back and a 38-year-old man named Ethan Maxwell, who asked for nothing more than a few quiet hours under the sun. That morning had been one of those rare southern Saturdays when the sky looked like a postcard and the air smelled like fresh-cut grass and chlorine. Ethan had spent the entire morning tackling yard work, mowing, trimming hedges, even fixing the pool ladder that had wobbled like a loose tooth all week. His reward? A solitary cannonball into his crystal-clear pool, an oversized floatie, and a tall glass of lemonade resting within arm's reach. He was mid-air, knees tucked, mind blank, when it started. A scream. High-pitched. Urgent. Unwelcome. He hit the water with a thunderous splash, the sound echoing off the backyard fence and momentarily drowning out the chaos that had just entered his domain. When he resurfaced, blinking chlorine from his lashes, he saw her. Karen Ulrich. Visor, sunglasses, floral shirt, and the unmistakable scent of entitlement trailing behind her like perfume. She stood on his back patio, brandishing a phone like it was a law enforcement badge, and shouting about trespassing on HOA-controlled property. Her flip-flops slapped the concrete like a metronome of madness as she narrated the entire scene for her phone, filming him as though he were a suspect in some community crime drama. "This is the perpetrator," she said with theatrical disgust, using a communal resource in blatant disregard of HOA protocol. Ethan swam to the pool's edge with unhurried grace, as though to signal that her words held no weight. He pulled himself out, reached for his towel, and tried not to laugh as he said plainly, "Karen, this is my house." Her eyes narrowed into slits. "This land falls under HOA jurisdiction. That pool is communal space. We had a vote." "You're wrong," Ethan replied, flipping open a deck box to grab a folder with his deed. "This property has never been in your HOA. I'm not a member. Never have been." Karen didn't argue. She stormed toward the side gate, muttering, "You'll regret this," before dialing 911 with the speed and conviction of a woman reporting an armed robbery rather than a man enjoying his backyard. When two sheriff's deputies arrived, the scene resembled a parody. Karen met them at the curb like she was leading an episode of Cops, arms flailing, voice trembling with righteous fury. "He refuses to vacate the pool. He's violating community regulations," she cried. Ethan stayed calm, waving politely from the patio like a neighbor greeting the mailman. "I live here. Want to see the paperwork?" The taller deputy took the manila folder, stepped aside to make a call, while the other officer peered at Karen with a mix of confusion and pity. 10 minutes later, they returned, the sunburnt one scratching his head. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "county records show this property is not, and has never been, part of your HOA. It's independently zoned." Karen froze. "That can't be. We had a map." The board doesn't overrule county lines," the officer interrupted. "And filing a false report is a serious offense." Ethan saw it, the flicker of panic, the disbelief warping Karen's lips into a thin, shaking line. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You're setting a dangerous example for this community." And with that, she disappeared through the gate. The officers left soon after, offering Ethan a sympathetic nod. "You'd be surprised how often this happens," one said. But Ethan wasn't surprised. Karen had long been a suburban legend in East Valley Ridge. She once reported a neighbor's Halloween display for spiritual disruption and tried to ban wind chimes because they interfered with migratory bird behavior. But this was a whole new level. That night, under a velvet sky studded with stars, Ethan sat on a lounge chair, feet dangling in his pool. He thought maybe, just maybe, that was the end of it. But the next morning, tucked inside his mailbox like a poisonous fortune cookie, was a note written in bright pink marker on the back of a church bulletin. "Join the HOA before things get difficult." No name, no signature, but unmistakably Karen. Ethan laughed, crumpled the note, and tossed it in the trash. But in the pit of his stomach, something shifted. This wasn't about pool rules. This was about power. And Karen Ulrich didn't care about lines on a map. She only cared about control. And when people like her lose control, they don't retreat. They double down. 3 days later, just before dawn, Ethan's doorbell cam captured something that nearly made him spill his coffee. It was Karen, again, wrapped in a pale blue bathrobe, hair tied up in a knot, flashlight in one hand, a stack of papers in the other. She moved along the sidewalk like a ghost on patrol, glancing over her shoulder every few steps. At the edge of his property, she paused, then quickly stuffed a folded note into his mailbox before hurrying off like she'd just pulled off a jewel heist. When Ethan opened the note that morning, he burst out laughing. It was a faux violation notice, complete with a poorly copied HOA logo, a neon urgent sticker, and a completely made-up infraction titled Unauthorized Splash Distribution. Apparently, his cannonball had disturbed the communal peace and exceeded the wave limit as defined by neighborhood aquatic standards. He looked over at his pool, still and empty, and shook his head. Karen had officially lost it. Over the next week, the nonsense multiplied. Notes were left under his welcome mat. One was pinned to his fence with a clothespin. Another stuck under his windshield wiper. They all shared the same deranged format. Fake citations for things like unregulated wind chime frequency and unauthorized avian congregation. Translation: he had a bird feeder. But the moment Ethan realized this wasn't just a game anymore came on a cloudy Thursday afternoon. A white van pulled into his driveway. Animal control. The officer was polite, clipboard in hand, but serious. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint stating Ethan was housing multiple aggressive animals. A pit bull, a parrot, and a goat. Ethan nearly choked. "You're kidding, right?" The officer wasn't. He invited him into the backyard, where the only threat was a comically large inflatable flamingo floating in the pool. No pit bull, no parrot, no goat, just squirrels. Lots of squirrels. The officer apologized before leaving, clearly annoyed he'd been dragged out for nothing. But Ethan didn't need the man to tell him who made the call. It was obvious. Karen wasn't just escalating. She was laying groundwork, trying to paint him as disruptive, dangerous, a rogue element that needed to be subdued. So Ethan did what she never expected. He fought back, legally, precisely, and with receipts. He went to the county records office, paid for a certified property survey, and had the results printed in full color, laminated, and framed. There it was in red and white. His property, clearly outside any HOA jurisdiction. A golden ticket, one he planned to use. But he didn't stop there. He made extra copies for the sheriff's department, the actual HOA board, and one especially for Karen. Then he marked his calendar for the next HOA meeting. Technically, Ethan wasn't part of the HOA. But since Karen had been dropping fake violation notices all over the neighborhood, impersonating board authority, and calling the police on him, he figured his presence was more than justified. He arrived 10 minutes early and found a seat in the back. The room buzzed with quiet tension. Janet, the board manager, gave him a knowing nod. When Karen strutted in a few minutes later, clipboard in hand and lips tight with faux importance, the air shifted. Conversation stopped. People leaned in. She launched into a monologue about community cohesion and protecting our shared spaces. Her voice rose with theatrical flair as she pointed toward Ethan, without naming him directly, and spoke of the corrosive influence of unsanctioned property behavior. It was bizarre, like watching a school play written by a conspiracy theorist. When she finished, Ethan stood. He calmly introduced himself, handed copies of his property deed to the board, and played security footage of Karen sneaking onto his lawn at night and stuffing violations into his mailbox. Laughter rippled through the room. Someone clapped. Janet stood and confirmed what many already suspected. Karen had no authority, had been officially removed from the board 2 years prior, and had received multiple cease and desist warnings. This time, the board would take legal action. Karen tried to interrupt, but nobody let her. She stormed out before the meeting even ended. That night, Ethan checked his cameras again. There she was, standing at the edge of his fence, just staring, silent, unmoving, like a statue sculpted from resentment. But Ethan didn't feel fear. He felt power, because now, the neighborhood wasn't just watching her. They were laughing at her. And for someone like Karen, ridicule is the one thing she can't control. The morning after the HOA meeting should have been peaceful. It wasn't. Ethan was jolted awake by the shriek of a power drill at 6:13 a.m. At first, he thought it was a neighbor doing roof work, but the sounds were too close, right outside his fence. He stepped onto his back porch, coffee in hand, and saw it. Karen, in full supervisory mode. 2 men, hired contractors by the look of their gear, were digging holes along the shared gravel path that bordered Ethan's backyard. One of them held a post-hole digger, the other was hauling bags of quick-dry cement. Karen stood off to the side, arms folded, barking orders and holding a printed sign that read, "Restricted access, HOA members only." Ethan blinked, as if the caffeine hadn't hit yet. But this wasn't a dream. She was building a wall. Not metaphorically. An actual physical wall. It started with tall wooden posts and a cheap vinyl banner strung between them like the backdrop to a school play. The banner was full of typos, clashing colors, and bore a fake HOA seal that looked like it had been designed by a sleep-deprived intern. In huge block letters, it declared, "Members only recreational sideline private zone." Ethan leaned on his fence and called out casually, "Building a wall to protect yourself from the splash radius?" Karen didn't turn around. She just pointed to the banner and said, "This is to preserve community visibility standards. Non-members should not enjoy privileges they refuse to support." "Privileges?" he replied. "That's sunlight, Karen, not a gym membership." But she wasn't listening. She was already gesturing to the workers to start pouring concrete on land that, by Ethan's freshly printed survey, wasn't hers to use. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He documented. Photographs. Videos. Close-ups of the cement bags, the property line, the position of each post. That afternoon, he called a certified land surveyor. Again, the new survey, just like the last one, confirmed it. Karen's wall was 6 feet over the boundary line on his property. He filed a report with the county zoning office the same day. He didn't mention Karen's name. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Meanwhile, Karen doubled down. She started printing flyers, cheap black and white ones, and placing them under windshield wipers and door mats throughout the neighborhood. The flyers warned of unauthorized gatherings, excessive water usage, and unregulated poolside behavior. Ethan found one on his own truck. It listed a new offense: reckless sunbathing during drought season. He laughed. Then he planned a barbecue. Nothing extravagant. Just a few friends, a Bluetooth speaker, and some ribs on the grill. Karen, predictably, stood behind her ridiculous wall, now equipped with a badly cut square in the banner she referred to as the compliance observation window. She popped her head up every few minutes like a prairie dog in a management seminar, snapping photos and muttering into her phone. One guest waved at her and shouted, "Hey neighbor, you good back there?" Everyone laughed. Karen vanished behind the wall for the rest of the night. 2 mornings later, a county inspector arrived. A soft-spoken man with a clipboard and a ballpoint pen, he walked Ethan's property slowly, noting the survey markers and reviewing the photos. He didn't say much, just nodded a lot. Ethan didn't expect a response quickly. But 48 hours later, a bright yellow demolition notice was stapled to the wooden wall. The document was clear. The structure violated zoning ordinances, encroached on private property, and needed to be removed within 7 days or Karen would face escalating fines. That afternoon, Ethan caught her staring at the notice. Her expression was nuclear. She marched across her yard, ranting about bureaucratic sabotage and deep-state HOA corruption. Ethan just waved and went back to pruning his hydrangeas. By that night, the demolition notice had gone viral, within the neighborhood at least. Someone took a photo of the sign and posted it in the group chat. Another neighbor turned it into a meme. Karen v. The wall, dawn of embarrassment. Karen tried to cover the sign with a sheet of cardboard. People just peeled it off. She refused to take the wall down. On day 8, a county work crew arrived, 2 men in orange vests, one holding a power drill and the other a crowbar. Karen stormed out of her house flailing printed documents. She stood in front of the wall like a protester defending the last tree in a bulldozed forest. But this time, the law wasn't on her side. The same sheriff's deputy from the pool incident showed up. He gave her one final warning. She refused. He gently escorted her to the sidewalk. The workers got to work. Within an hour, the wall was gone. The banner lay in a crumpled heap beside Karen's driveway. Sunlight once again reached Ethan's pool deck, warming the tiles like a kiss of vindication. All that remained was a crooked plastic sign on Karen's lawn that used to say Community Unity. Now it just said, Calm URI. Fitting, somehow. That evening, Ethan sat in his lounge chair, beer in hand, watching the sunset over the restored horizon. The wall was gone. The neighborhood was quiet. But he knew it wouldn't last. Karen had tasted defeat. And people like her? They don't leave the battlefield. They rebrand it. 3 days after the wall came down, Ethan found a manila envelope shoved halfway under his front door. No postage. No return address. Just a bold, slanted line scrawled in red ink across the front. See you in court. Inside was a stack of messy photocopies, grainy, out of alignment, and smelling faintly of cheap toner. At the very top sat a self-written complaint form filed in Maple County Small Claims Court, listing Ethan as the defendant and Karen Ulrich as the plaintiff. Charges: harassment, emotional distress, reputation sabotage. Damages sought: $5,000. Ethan laughed, not because it wasn't serious, but because it was so completely Karen. She wasn't just angry, she was trying to make herself a martyr in front of the very people who had watched her fake authority unravel like a cheap sweater. He called the county clerk's office. The case was real. A court date was set for the following Tuesday morning. Karen was representing herself. "Of course she is," Ethan muttered. He didn't take it lightly. He knew better. Vindictive people rarely walked into court without some performance planned. So, he spent the rest of the week building his case, not out of spite, but out of caution. He printed copies of everything: the official survey, the property deed, photos of the wall construction and demolition, every fake violation notice Karen had left, screenshots from the neighborhood group chat with neighbors confirming similar harassment, footage from his security system, especially the night Karen was seen sneaking up in her robe to stuff a bogus citation in his mailbox. He even included a copy of the restraining order issued by the HOA board after the last meeting, barring Karen from contacting him in any form. He was ready. The day of the hearing, the county courthouse was quiet except for the echo of Karen's heels clicking furiously against the marble floor. She stood outside the courtroom with a thick binder tucked under her arm, still wearing the plastic tag from the department store on the sleeve of her navy blazer. She paced like a shark circling in ankle-deep water. When she spotted Ethan, she pointed dramatically and declared, "There he is, the menace of Maple Ridge." Ethan gave a polite nod and kept walking. Inside, the courtroom looked like a tired sitcom set. The judge, a weary man in his 60s with reading glasses perched low on his nose, called the case and motioned for them to sit. Karen wasted no time. She stood and delivered what she called her victim impact statement. It was a surreal monologue filled with phrases like visual trauma from repeated aquatic disruptions, emotional corrosion from public ridicule, the symbolic dismantling of community structure by unlawful forces. She even referred to her demolished wall as a peace structure and Ethan's yard as an anti-compliance rebellion zone. The judge's eyebrows climbed steadily higher as she spoke, until they nearly disappeared into his graying hair. When she finally sat down, triumphant and flushed, Ethan stood with quiet confidence. He walked the court through the timeline of fact by fact. No theatrics, just truth. He showed the video of Karen at his mailbox. He showed the false citations with the fake HOA seal. He presented the survey, the zoning report, and the demolition order. He submitted witness statements from neighbors who'd been harassed by Karen, including screenshots of her online rants. He played the clip of her screaming at the demolition crew and refusing to move. Finally, he handed the judge the official HOA documentation proving Karen had been stripped of all authority nearly 2 years ago. The judge didn't say anything at first. He flipped through the documents, slowly, carefully. Then came the unexpected twist. One of the current HOA board members, a woman named Carolyn Barnes, had come to observe the case. When the judge asked if any parties had context, she raised her hand and was sworn in. She took the stand and confirmed everything. Karen had been removed, warned, monitored. Her behavior had worsened since her removal, not improved. She admitted that the board had been quietly gathering complaints in case legal intervention became necessary. Karen had become a liability, not a leader. When the judge turned to Karen and asked, "Do you have any evidence that this man broke the law or caused you harm?" she opened her binder with the urgency of someone cracking open a treasure chest. She pulled out a blurry photo of Ethan floating in his pool. "This," she said breathlessly, "is a violation of visual harmony." He waved at my window. He knew I could see. The room went silent. The judge stared at her for a long moment. Then, he sighed so deeply it echoed. "Case dismissed," he said flatly. "This is a frivolous claim." Karen gasped. The judge wasn't finished. "In addition to dismissal," he continued, "I'm granting the defendant's request for a formal restraining order. Ms. Ulrich is prohibited from any contact, direct or indirect, with Mr. Maxwell. She will also pay all court fees. Any future incidents may result in criminal charges." Karen's mouth opened. No sound came out. Her binder slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. As Ethan walked past her on his way out, she tried to say something, but the deputy standing nearby shook his head and raised a hand. "Don't," he said firmly. Outside, the sun was shining. The birds were singing. Ethan let out a full-bellied laugh he'd been holding back for over a month. Karen had come to court thinking she was about to reclaim power. Instead, she had broadcast her own downfall. And the internet? Well, the internet was about to make sure everyone saw it. The courthouse defeat should have been the end. But Karen's collapse was too loud, too public, and far too absurd to simply fade away. What came next wasn't retaliation. It was something far worse, for her, at least. Viral fame. It started with a video. Someone, likely one of the younger residents, had recorded parts of the HOA meeting where Karen was exposed. They stitched it together with clips from her courtroom meltdown, layered screenshots from the neighborhood group chat, and added a dramatic orchestral soundtrack for effect. They titled it, HOA Karen Gets Exposed in Court Over a Backyard Pool. It blew up. Within 48 hours, the video had over 200,000 views on YouTube. Within the week, it passed 500,000. Reddit threads spun theories about her mental state. TikTok teens reenacted her emotional corrosion speech with Oscar-worthy drama. Memes flooded Instagram. One labeled her banner as Emotional Damage Prevention Shield. Another showed Ethan's pool with the caption, "Not your HOA. Not your rules. Not your problem." The HOA subreddit dubbed it the Maple Ridge Revolt. Ethan hadn't asked for any of it, but he'd be lying if he said it didn't make him laugh. Especially when a neighbor slipped a bottle of wine onto his porch with a note that simply read, "For surviving suburban warfare, Cameron." A week later, the local ABC affiliate sent a reporter to his home. They wanted an interview, a feel-good story, a neighborhood hero arc. Ethan politely declined. He wasn't interested in the spotlight. He just wanted to mow his lawn, float in his pool, and maybe enjoy a burger without being accused of reckless grilling. Karen, however, vanished. Her car disappeared from the driveway. Her blinds were always drawn. No one saw her in the grocery store, or at the park, or even collecting her mail. Some neighbors claimed she was staying with a sister in another state to avoid the humiliation. Others whispered she was sneaking in and out through the side gate like a fugitive from her own life. Whatever the truth, Karen was gone, not legally, not permanently, but socially erased. And the neighborhood? It bloomed. Lawn decorations reappeared. Wind chimes rang freely. Kids rode bikes down sidewalks that had once been patrolled like prison yards. One neighbor put up a plastic flamingo with a tiny sign around its neck, Karen-free zone. Even the mailman looked more relaxed. To celebrate, Ethan threw a party. Not just any party, a full-blown liberation pool party. He printed towels that read, "Pool rules by me, not Karen." A friend brought inflatable flamingos. Another set up a projector that played silent footage of waves crashing on a beach, except once every few minutes, it glitched into a frame of Karen's courtroom rant with echo effects added for drama. At the center of it all stood a cardboard cutout of Karen, one hand on her hip, a word bubble above her head reading, "Emotional distress loading." Guests lined up for selfies. The food was simple: burgers, chips, cold drinks. The vibe was electric. People laughed, not just at Karen, but at how absurd everything had become. Toward the end of the night, someone asked Ethan, "Now that she's out of the picture, will you join the HOA?" He pointed to a brand new wooden sign he'd mounted near the pool gate. "Not part of your HOA. Never was. Never will be." Applause erupted. Someone suggested putting it on a t-shirt. Another yelled, "Make it a bumper sticker." Ethan just smiled. The battle was over. But the legend? That would live on. A few days later, a for sale sign appeared on Karen's front lawn. No warning. No goodbye. Just a quiet surrender. A white flag wrapped in a realtor's placard. Rumors swirled. She was moving out of state, being pressured by family, even planning to change her name. Ethan didn't ask. He didn't care. He spent the day on the far side of his yard, pruning tomato plants, letting the sun warm his back. By the time he glanced toward Karen's house, the driveway was empty. The windows were dark. She was gone. Just like that. No final speech. No handwritten threat. No swan song. Just absence. That evening, Ethan sat on his porch with a cold beer, feet resting on the cool edge of the pool. He looked out at the sign, his favorite new lawn ornament. Not your HOA. Not your rules. Not your problem. It wasn't just a slogan. It was a reminder that sometimes the loudest person in the room is also the one who's completely, utterly wrong. And when they finally lose, the silence they leave behind is better than any victory speech.